Today, Australia's old world economy is not fit for purpose. Hello again, it's Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics. Welcome to our latest posts covering finance and property news with a distinctively Australian flavour. Today, I want to dive into the whole question of the nature and structure of our economy. Of course, you know that I've been arguing for some time that we've been driven by huge amounts of debt, housing, and all of those factors. But there's a much more fundamental structural issue which, through the last election campaign, hardly got touched on at all. Now, there was an excellent article by Roy Green, who's the Emeritus Professor and UTS Innovation Advisor at the University of Technology in Sydney, and it was published in The Conversation today. And he said that 3 years ago, the then Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull went to the election spruiking the wonders of innovation. There has never been a more exciting time to be an Australian. Government advertising had enthused in the months before. But the public wasn't enthused, and Turnbull's government barely scraped back into office. Since then, innovation policy has spooked the political class. They see it as a vote loser and a threat to jobs, mostly their own. Consequently, innovation and industry policy has received the least attention just when the decline of investment in research and development may matter most to our economic future. The red bars in this chart show the average intensity of the member states of the OECD and the European Union. Data for Argentina, Australia, New Zealand, Poland, Switzerland, Turkey, and South Africa is from 2015, and data from Singapore is from 2014. OECD main science and technology indicators database is the source. After the terms of trade downturn of the 1980s and the economic reforms of the 1990s, Australia enjoyed the biggest unanticipated mining boom in our history, thanks to the rise of China. John Howard wanted us to be relaxed and comfortable, and we were, at least while it lasted. Increased commodity prices boosted our terms of trade without any extra effort on our part. By contrast with Norway, which prepared for its post-oil future with a 76% resource rent tax and sovereign wealth fund, Australians enjoyed tax cuts and a spending splurge. However, the underlying structural problems of our economy had not gone away. Measured by the research intensity of our exports, Australia's economic complexity ranks at 59 between Kazakhstan and Lebanon. This index, which is compiled by the MIT's Observatory of Economic Complexity, is topped by Japan, Switzerland, and Germany. Our position in global innovation rankings is no less dismal, especially when it comes to turning ideas into products. While recent domestic growth has been driven by services, retail, and construction, our future living standards will depend on how we pay our way in the world. This means identifying new, more sustainable sources of export income. Of course, resources will still have a part to play, but not as unprocessed raw materials. For example, we have everything we need for renewable energy production, battery manufacture, and hydrogen exports, and how could anyone contemplate continuation of the barbaric live animal trade? The graphic here shows Australia's export profile in 2017. Of $244 billion of total exports, $131 billion were mineral products. Now, this rebalancing won't happen automatically through the market. It will require active intervention to manage the post-mining boom transition to an inclusive and dynamic knowledge-based economy, and to reverse the slowdown in productivity growth associated with current wage stagnation. During the boom, high prices for coal and iron ore masked Australia's deteriorating productivity performance. Now mining no longer contributes to growth, the impact on our national income has become all too obvious. That's why it was so important to Malcolm Turnbull to reinvigorate the national innovation and science agenda with a focus on startups and business university collaboration after Tony Abbott's $3 billion cuts to Labour's programmes. And that's why it was then so disappointing he could not build in his agenda for an ideas boom to replace the mining boom. The coalition government has cycled through 3 prime ministers and 6 industry ministers. It continues to cut science and innovation programs. Its latest budget savings included $4 billion from the Research and Development Tax Incentive Scheme, $3.8 billion from the Education Investment Fund, and $2.2 billion from higher education. As a result, Australia's total spending on research and development is now just 1.88% of GDP from 2.11% 5 years ago. The government contribution is 0.57%, and it's where it was in the 1980s. Meanwhile, Japan and Sweden are committing more than 3%, and Korea and Israel are more than 4%. For any mention of innovation and industry policy in the current campaign, you have to look really hard. The coalition has confined itself to some low-key announcements on a new space agency, defence innovation, genomics, food, marine science and manufacturing. It has rejected or parked the recommendations of its own Innovation and Science Australia 2030 strategy, including using any savings from winding back the R&D tax incentive to promote high-growth export opportunities. Labor has committed to a collaboration premium to encourage business engagement with universities and the CSIRO as part of a restructured R&D tax incentive, another key recommendation of the 2030 strategy. However, it will also bank the coalition savings to achieve its budget surplus. In this context, it will be all the more challenging for a new Labour government to achieve its R&D target of 3% of GDP, given that this will require additional investment of at least $20 billion. And in addition, Labour has announced an off-budget $1 billion manufacturing future fund and a series of initiatives on renewable technologies, biofabrication, food and fibre, artificial intelligence, blockchain, space, hydrogen, electric vehicles and digital skills hubs. In an important symbolic gesture, it has also promised to rescue CSIRO climate science. Now, these initiatives are clearly worthwhile, but they do not restore the funding that has been lost, let alone increase it. If new policy must be paid for, why not cut expenditure that actually impedes economic transition? The diesel fuel tax rebate, for example. This $6 billion scheme whereby taxpayers subsidise fuel costs for the resources sector is equivalent to almost half the entire annual budget outlay for research and innovation. Most successful economies around the world use knowledge foresights to identify national priorities in areas of existing or potential competitive advantage. They have long-term, coherent policy frameworks for pursuing these priorities. Australia's next government will have a chance to devise such a framework in cooperation with businesses, unions and research organisations. Of course, it will require substantial public as well as private investment, but we can no longer afford a do-nothing approach. And just to reinforce that, remember that we are at the moment fortunately benefiting from very high iron ore prices. But this is unlikely to continue for much longer. So the whole economic balance of our economy and the future GDP performance are at the moment on the edge of a precipice. And unless we can find a way to substantially restructure and refocus the economy and diversify and innovate, I'm afraid that the Australian economy will continue to revert to a backwater. And given the fact that we are in the Asian century, and we are right in the middle of Asia, there is clearly huge opportunity if we could go grasp it. But so far as I can see, we do not have the vision, we do not have the funding, and we do not have the appetite. I just hope that the next government, whoever that may be, changes its tune, because without it, the future looks dismal. I'm Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics. Many thanks for watching, and I'll see you again next time.